Agent Mia Johnson was used to blending in, but tonight, she could feel every set of eyes in the restaurant trailing her. Being an undercover FBI agent came with challenges, but this time it wasn't the criminals she was worried about. It was the uniformed cop marching straight toward her. Assumptions already flashing in his eyes. Before we get started, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let us know where you're watching from. At a luxurious restaurant bustling with the city's elite, Agent Mia Johnson, an experienced undercover FBI operative, was focused on a high-stakes mission. Her target, Victor Morales, a charismatic businessman with deep connections to an international money-laundering ring, had just arrived. The restaurant wasn't just a hotspot for fine dining, it was a key location in the operation. Sitting near the back, Mia maintained her calm demeanor, blending into the upscale environment while discreetly observing Morales' every move. Her sophisticated recording device, disguised as an elegant bracelet, captured everything. However, the growing tension in the room was hard to ignore. Subtle stares and hushed whispers seemed to follow her. Mia, the only black woman in a sea of privilege, couldn't shake the feeling that she was drawing more attention than intended. Agent Mia Johnson sat at her table near the back of the high-accent restaurant, scanning the room with practiced precision. The establishment, known for its exclusivity, was filled with elegantly dressed patrons, all of whom seemed at ease in their opulent surroundings. However, Mia, the only black woman present, couldn't ignore the subtle yet palpable weight of their stares. Though no one was overtly hostile, the glances, the lingering looks, the whispers just loud enough to be noticed, spoke volumes. She had experienced this kind of scrutiny countless times before. Mia's training as an undercover FBI agent had prepared her for intense situations, but tonight's discomfort was different. It wasn't just about being out of place among the city's wealthy elite. It was about what they saw when they looked at her. Someone who didn't belong, someone whose presence raised questions. Yet, she didn't let the unease rattle her. Years of fieldwork had taught her the importance of maintaining composure, even when the odds seemed stacked against her. Carefully, Mia adjusted the silver bracelet on her wrist, its hidden recording device subtly activated. Her mission tonight was clear: gather evidence against Victor Morales, the influential businessman at the center of an international money laundering operation. He was at the bar now, charming his associates as if he had nothing to hide. Mia couldn't afford to let the judgmental stares distract her. Each move she made was calculated, every action designed to keep her cover intact. She picked up the menu, using it as a prop to appear occupied, her sharp eyes darting across the room. The discomfort might have lingered, but her focus remained unshaken. The mission came first. Victor Morales, the target of Agent Mia Johnson's investigation, entered the upscale restaurant with his usual air of confidence. Dressed impeccably, he made his way to the bar, shaking hands and laughing with his associates, projecting the charm of a successful businessman. From her table, Mia discreetly observed, her focus sharp. This was the moment she had been waiting for, an opportunity to gather critical evidence for the FBI's case against him. However, the atmosphere shifted abruptly. The low hum of conversations quieted, and all eyes turned toward the entrance. A uniformed police officer, identified by Mia as Mark Turner, strode in, his imposing figure and stern expression radiating authority. His gaze swept the room with deliberate intensity, and Mia's instincts immediately went on high alert. Something about his presence felt off, a complication she hadn't anticipated. Officer Mark Turner, infamous for his overconfidence and brash behavior, strode purposefully toward Agent Mia Johnson's table. His presence immediately disrupted the restaurant's refined ambience, drawing attention from the surrounding patrons. Mia, seated calmly and poised, sensed trouble the moment his sharp eyes locked on her. Despite her efforts to maintain her cover and blend in, she could see his assumptions forming even before he spoke. "Miss," Turner said firmly, stopping at her table, his voice cutting through the quiet hum of the restaurant. His tone carried an unspoken authority, demanding compliance. Mia looked up, her expression neutral, masking the irritation building within her. "Yes, officer," she replied, her voice steady. Turner's gaze scanned her from head to toe, his brows furrowed in skepticism. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his words laced with judgment. Mia met his gaze, unflinching, aware of the delicate line she had to walk to avoid blowing her cover. "Just having dinner," she replied simply, gesturing toward the untouched menu in front of her. Turner's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the table, noting the absence of food or drink. His gaze then shifted around the room, as if silently questioning her presence in the upscale establishment. "I'm gonna need to see some ID," Turner demanded, his tone sharp. Mia's pulse quickened, but outwardly she remained composed. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her calm voice belying the tension of the moment. Turner leaned closer, his suspicion evident. "You seem out of place." "We've had complaints," he said, his words carefully vague yet clearly targeted. Mia knew exactly what he meant. She had encountered this kind of profiling before, the assumption that her presence was somehow a disruption, that she didn't belong. Her jaw tightened, but she kept her movements deliberate as she reached into her purse and handed over her ID. Turner examined it closely, his skepticism unabated. "Mia Johnson," he muttered, as if her name alone was suspect. "You don't strike me as the type to dine here alone." "What's really going on?" Mia held her composure, suppressing the growing frustration bubbling inside. Across the room, she caught a fleeting glance from Victor Morales at the bar, his attention now partially on her. This was the last thing she needed, a scene that could compromise her carefully planned mission. "Officer," she said quietly, her voice firm but controlled, "I haven't done anything wrong. I'd appreciate it if you let me finish my meal." Turner didn't back down. Instead, he smirked, clearly enjoying the control he thought he wielded. "I'm going to need you to come with me for further questioning," he said, motioning for backup. The situation was escalating quickly, and Mia realized she had no choice but to comply for now. Officer Mark Turner, his arrogance fully on display, escalated the situation without justification, ignoring Mia Johnson's calm explanation and the lack of any real evidence. He decided to arrest her, claiming she needed further questioning. Before Mia could fully process the implications, Turner motioned to his backup, and within moments, cold metal handcuffs were snapped onto her wrists. The clinking of the cups and Turner's commanding voice drew the attention of the entire restaurant, creating a humiliating spectacle. Patrons whispered and stared, their expressions ranging from shock to quiet judgment. Mia kept her head high, her calm exterior masking the turmoil inside. She knew this public arrest could jeopardize months of undercover work on the Morales case. As Turner led her through the restaurant and out the door, the murmurs followed her, amplifying the gravity of the situation. Her mission, once carefully controlled, now hung by a thread. Agent Mia Johnson sat stiffly in the back seat of the squad car, her wrists still sore from the too tight handcuffs. The dim interior was filled with tension, amplified by the officer's condescending remarks from the front seat. Officer Mark Turner glanced at her through the rearview mirror, his smug expression betraying his misplaced sense of authority. "You've got some nerve," he sneered, his tone dripping with derision. "A place like that isn't exactly where people like you usually hang out. So what were you really doing there?" Mia held his gaze in the mirror for a moment before shifting her eyes away, unwilling to let him bait her into an emotional response. Years of FBI training had prepared her to maintain composure in the face of pressure, but Turner's arrogance, steeped in racial bias, was testing her limits. "I was having dinner," she replied evenly, her voice devoid of the frustration simmering beneath her calm exterior. Turner let out a scoffing laugh, shaking his head as he drove. "Dinner? Sure, that's what it looked like." He let the insinuation linger, as though her presence in the upscale restaurant was inherently suspicious. Mia clenched her jaw, resisting the urge to respond. Her focus had to remain on the bigger picture. This wasn't just about her dignity. It was about the undercover mission she had spent months on. Victor Morales had seen the commotion, and if he began to suspect that she wasn't a regular patron, the entire operation could unravel. Next to Turner, his partner Officer Richards remained silent, his eyes fixed forward. Mia wondered briefly if Richards shared Turner's views or if he was simply complicit in his silence. Either way, the result was the same. She was sitting in the back of a squad car, humiliated and treated like a criminal because Turner couldn't see beyond his biases. As the car moved through the city streets, Mia's mind raced. She replayed the arrest in her head, analyzing every detail. Morales's quick glance in her direction at the restaurant had been enough to tell her that this fiasco was already raising red flags. If the operation fell apart, it wouldn't just be a professional failure. It would mean Morales walking free and the FBI losing its chance to dismantle his criminal network. Despite the sting of injustice, Mia forced herself to stay calm. Losing her temper now wouldn't help the situation, and revealing her true identity prematurely could compromise everything. Instead, she sat quietly, letting Turner's words roll off her, focusing on the mission and the steps she'd need to take to salvage it. Inside, her determination solidified. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. At the precinct, Agent Mia Johnson sat in the cold, dimly lit holding cell, her wrists still marked from the handcuffs that had been secured too tightly. The humiliation of the night lingered, but her focus remained on the mission and the hope that her team would intervene before any irreparable damage was done. The muffled sounds of conversations and the occasional ring of a phone outside the cell were the only reminders that she wasn't completely alone. Even so, she couldn't help but feel the weight of injustice pressing down on her. Mia had been through intense situations before, but this one felt uniquely infuriating. She wasn't just an innocent person wrongfully detained. She was a federal agent on an active undercover operation. And all of it was unraveling because of Officer Mark Turner's reckless assumptions. His arrogance and bias had created a public spectacle, jeopardizing months of careful planning. Yet, despite the anger simmering inside her, Mia remained composed. Losing her cool now would only make things worse. Outside the holding cell, Captain Robert Edwards arrived, his expression stern as he reviewed the situation. Known for his no-nonsense demeanor, Edwards had been briefed about the arrest and was already aware that things had gone seriously wrong. Accompanying him was Special Agent Marcus Williams, Mia's handler, whose presence immediately shifted the energy in the precinct. Tall and imposing in his sharp suit, Williams exuded authority as he entered, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Turner. "Officer Turner," Edwards said curtly, motioning for the young officer to approach. Turner's initial confidence faltered as he met the captain's gaze. "Can you explain why this woman is sitting in a holding cell?" Turner straightened, attempting to maintain his usual bravado. "She was acting suspicious at the restaurant, Captain," he replied. "We had complaints about her behavior, and when I questioned her, she refused to cooperate. I followed protocol." Edwards raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Complaints from who?" Turner hesitated, his confidence slipping further. "A few patrons. I didn't get their names, but it was enough to warrant action." "Action?" Edwards' voice hardened. "You mean racial profiling?" He gestured toward Mia, who watched the exchange through the bars of her cell with quiet intensity. "You brought her in without evidence of any crime. That's not protocol, Turner. That's bias." Before Turner could stammer out a defense, Williams stepped forward. His voice was calm, but carried an edge that demanded attention. "Ah, Captain Edwards, I'm Special Agent Marcus Williams, FBI. The woman you have sitting in that cell is Agent Mia Johnson, one of my best operatives. She was in the middle of an undercover assignment tonight. An assignment that has now been jeopardized because your officer decided she didn't belong at a restaurant." Turner's face went pale as the realization of his mistake began to sink in. "I didn't know," he muttered, his tone defensive. "She didn't identify herself." "Because she couldn't," Williams interrupted, his voice cutting through the room like a knife. "She's undercover, or was, until you made a public spectacle out of arresting her without cause." The room fell silent, the weight of Williams's words settling over everyone present. Turner shifted uncomfortably, his previous arrogance now replaced with visible unease. Edwards sighed heavily, pinching the bridge of his nose as he processed the situation. "Turner," Edwards said finally, his voice cold, "you've crossed a line tonight. This wasn't just a mistake. It was an abuse of your authority. You've put this precinct in the spotlight for all the wrong reasons, and you've compromised a federal investigation." Edwards turned to Williams, his tone more conciliatory. "Special Agent Williams, I'll personally ensure that Agent Johnson is released immediately. Officer Turner will face an internal investigation, and I'll make sure appropriate disciplinary action is taken." "See that you do," Williams replied sharply, "and make sure he understands the gravity of what he's done. This isn't just about tonight, it's about the pattern of behavior he represents." Edwards nodded, signaling to another officer to unlock Mia's cell. The metallic clang of the door opening was a relief to Mia, though the bitterness of the experience still weighed heavily on her. As she stepped out, she held her head high, refusing to let the humiliation define her. Turner stood to the side, his gaze fixed on the floor, unable to meet hers. His earlier smugness was gone, replaced by the reality of his crumbling authority. Mia didn't spare him a glance as she walked past, her focus solely on Williams, who gave her a reassuring nod. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "I'll be fine," Mia replied, her voice steady but edged with determination. "But we need to move quickly. Morales might already suspect something." "We'll handle it," Williams assured her. "But first, let's get you out of here." As they exited the precinct, the cold night air hit Mia's face, refreshing, but not enough to wash away the memory of the night's events. She took a deep breath, her resolve strengthening. The mission wasn't over, and neither was the fight for justice. In the precinct's tense atmosphere, Captain Robert Edwards faced Officer Mark Turner in his office, his stern expression leaving no room for argument. Turner, usually confident, now stood stiffly under his superior's withering glare. The air between them was heavy, filled with the gravity of what had transpired. Captain Edwards had reviewed the situation in detail and knew exactly what had happened. An unacceptable breach of protocol fueled by Turner's prejudices. "Officer Turner," Edwards began, his voice cold and deliberate, "do you have any idea what you've done tonight? Because from where I'm standing, this goes beyond a simple mistake. You racially profiled an innocent woman, arrested her without probable cause, and compromised an active federal investigation. This isn't just incompetence, it's a disgrace to this precinct." Turner shifted uncomfortably, his earlier bravado now replaced with visible unease. "Captain, I didn't know she was FBI," he stammered. She didn't identify herself." "She didn't have to," Edwards interrupted sharply, "because she was undercover, doing her job, something you failed to do properly. Instead of assessing the situation or gathering facts, you acted on your assumptions. You saw a black woman in an upscale restaurant and decided she didn't belong. That's not policing, Turner, that's bias, plain and simple." Turner's face flushed and his gaze dropped to the floor. His excuses, so confidently voiced earlier, now seemed hollow even to him. Edwards leaned forward, his tone growing even harsher. "Effective immediately, you are suspended from duty, pending an internal investigation. Turn in your badge and gun before you leave this precinct, and let me be very clear, there will be consequences for your actions." The weight of the reprimand settled heavily on Turner. He nodded stiffly, unable to muster any response. The room was silent except for the ticking of the clock as Edwards turned to address Special Agent Marcus Williams, who stood nearby, his composed demeanor underscoring his authority. "Agent Williams." Edwards said, his tone more measured. "I deeply regret this incident. Agent Johnson will be released immediately, and I assure you, this matter will be handled thoroughly." Williams nodded, his gaze sharp as he spoke. "Thank you, Captain Edwards. But understand this: what happened tonight isn't just an embarrassment for this precinct. It's a symptom of a larger problem, one that needs addressing if incidents like this are to be avoided in the future." Edwards gave a curt nod, acknowledging the rebuke. He gestured to another officer to unlock Mia Johnson's cell. The metallic clang of the bars echoed in the quiet space as the door swung open. Agent Johnson stepped out with a calm but resolute expression, her head held high, despite the humiliating ordeal she had endured. Williams approached her, his tone softening slightly as he asked, "You okay?" Mia nodded, her voice steady. "I will be, but we need to move quickly. Morales saw what happened. He might already suspect something." Williams placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll deal with it. Right now, let's focus on getting you out of here." As Mia walked past Turner, she didn't spare him a glance. His gaze remained fixed on the ground, his earlier arrogance now replaced by the realization of his failure. The whispers and murmurs of other officers followed her, but she didn't acknowledge them. Her focus was already on the mission ahead. Outside the precinct, the cool night air greeted Mia and Williams as they stepped into the parking lot. Williams gave her a small nod of approval. "You handled yourself well in there. It wasn't easy, but you stayed composed. That speaks volumes." "Thank you," Mia replied, her voice firm but weary. "But this isn't over, not for Morales and not for what Turner represents. There's still so much work to do." Williams nodded again, understanding the weight of her words. "We'll get it done, one step at a time." Mia took a deep breath, the resolve in her chest solidifying. Tonight had been a setback, but it wasn't the end. The mission and the larger fight for justice continued. Agent Mia Johnson sat in her car in the quiet of her driveway, letting the events of the night replay in her mind. The sting of injustice lingered, but she reminded herself that her mission wasn't over. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. The caller ID displayed an unknown number. Hesitating briefly, she answered. Johnson? The voice on the other end was hesitant, uncertain. She immediately recognized it as Officer Mark Turner. Her first instinct was to hang up, but she paused, curiosity mingling with her frustration. What could he possibly have to say? "This is Officer Turner," he began awkwardly, his tone devoid of the arrogance he had displayed earlier. I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I wanted to apologize." Mia's grip on the phone tightened, but she stayed silent, letting him continue. "I've spent the last few hours thinking about what happened," Turner said, his voice heavy with unease, "and I realize now that I made a mistake, a big one. I didn't just make a poor judgment call. I acted on assumptions, on prejudices that I didn't even realize I had until tonight." Mia exhaled slowly, her jaw tightening. His words were the kind she had heard before, apologies steeped in guilt and regret, but often too little, too late. Still, she allowed him to speak, curious to see if he truly understood the gravity of his actions. "I know my behavior was unacceptable," Turner continued. "When I saw you at that restaurant, I didn't see you as an individual. I saw you as someone who didn't belong. And that's on me. I can't take back what I did, but I want you to know I'm trying to learn from this." Mia's silence stretched, and Turner fumbled to fill it. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed to tell you how sorry I am. Not because of the consequences I'm facing, but because I know I disrespected you, and I disrespected the badge I wear." Mia took a deep breath before responding, her tone measured. "Officer Turner, I appreciate you taking the time to call and apologize, but an apology doesn't erase what happened. Your actions didn't just humiliate me, they jeopardized a federal investigation, one that's been months in the making. Do you understand the ripple effects of what you did?" "Yes," Turner admitted, his voice subdued. "I didn't think about the bigger picture. I let my biases dictate my actions, and I see now how damaging that was." "Good," Mia replied firmly, "but this isn't just about me or this one incident. What happened tonight is part of a much larger problem. You're not the first officer to make these kinds of assumptions, and unfortunately you won't be the last. The system you're part of enables and perpetuates this behavior. Do you see that?" There was a pause, and Mia could almost hear him grappling with her words. "I think I do," he said finally. "I know I have a lot to learn, and I want to be better. I don't want to be part of the problem anymore." Mia's voice softened slightly, though her words remained firm. "If you're serious about that, then you need to start holding yourself and others accountable. It's not enough to feel bad or promise to change. Real change happens when people like you stand up against the biases and prejudices that are ingrained in the system. It's about actions, not words." "I understand," Turner said quietly. "I'll do better." "I hope you will," Mia said, "but understand this. The damage you caused tonight doesn't just disappear because you feel bad about it. Trust is earned, not given, and you'll have to work hard to prove that you've changed, not to me, but to yourself and the people you serve." Turner's voice faltered slightly. "Thank you for hearing me out. I know I don't deserve it, but I'll take what you've said to heart." After a brief pause, Mia ended the conversation. "Good luck, Officer Turner. I hope you mean what you've said, because there are a lot of people who don't get the second chances you've been given. Don't waste it." With that, she hung up and placed her phone down, leaning back in her seat. The conversation had left her with a mix of emotions. Relief that Turner seemed to recognize his wrongdoing, but frustration at how deeply rooted the problem was. This wasn't the first time she had faced such bias, and she knew it wouldn't be the last. Mia's thoughts drifted back to the restaurant, the way Turner had singled her out without hesitation, the humiliation of being handcuffed and led out in front of the other patrons. She thought about the countless others who had experienced similar situations but lacked the platform or resources to push back. Her badge had protected her in the end, but what about those without such privileges? Her mind shifted to the mission at hand. Victor Morales, the target of her investigation, had likely seen the entire ordeal. The risk that he now suspected her true identity was high, and the operation might already be compromised. She couldn't let this setback derail her. The fight wasn't over against Morales, or against the systemic issues that Turner represented. The night air was cool as Mia stepped out of her car and headed inside. She set her keys and phone on the kitchen counter, pausing to collect her thoughts. The apology she had just received wasn't closure. It was a reminder of how much work there was still to do. Mia knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Changing the system, challenging biases, and dismantling prejudices required constant effort, but she also knew she wasn't alone in the fight. Her team at the FBI, her colleagues, and countless others were working toward the same goal, a system that truly upheld justice for everyone. As she prepared for bed, Mia resolved to carry the lessons of the night forward. Turner's apology, while appreciated, was just one small piece of a much larger puzzle. The work was far from done, but Mia was determined to see it through. After all, resilience was more than a survival skill. It was the foundation of progress. Agent Mia Johnson sat quietly in the corner of her dimly lit apartment, letting the events of the night wash over her. The tension that had kept her steady through hours of confrontation, humiliation, and frustration was beginning to fade, replaced by a weighty exhaustion. Her wrists still bore the red marks from the handcuffs, a physical reminder of the injustice she had endured. But more than the physical discomfort, it was the emotional toll that lingered, the constant reminder of how deeply systemic prejudice was embedded in the world she had committed her life to serving. The night's events replayed in her mind, the subtle stares in the restaurant, Officer Turner's assumptions and arrogance, the humiliation of being arrested in front of a room full of strangers, and the risk it had posed to her undercover mission. As an FBI agent, Mia had faced countless dangerous situations, but tonight felt different. This wasn't just about her professionalism being undermined. It was about her humanity being questioned. For years, Mia had fought to prove herself in a field where she was often the exception, a black woman in a world dominated by people who looked nothing like her. She had worked twice as hard for every opportunity, knowing that one mistake could mean everything she had built could be taken away. And tonight, despite all her accomplishments, despite her dedication to upholding the law, she had been reduced to a stereotype by someone who wielded power without accountability. But as painful and infuriating as the experience had been, Mia refused to let it define her. She knew that resilience wasn't just about enduring it. It was about fighting back, about using every setback as fuel to push forward. The system might be flawed, but Mia wasn't ready to give up on it. She believed in the principles of justice, even if they were often overshadowed by the failures of those tasked with upholding them. Mia's thoughts shifted to Victor Morales, the target of her investigation. Tonight's incident had undoubtedly caught his attention, and she couldn't afford to let the operation fall apart because of one cop's prejudice. Morales was a dangerous man, his money-laundering schemes funding networks of corruption that reached far beyond the city. Stopping him wasn't just about following protocol. It was about protecting countless lives from the ripple effects of his criminal enterprise. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling as she strategized her next steps. Her cover might be compromised, but the mission wasn't over. If anything, tonight's events had strengthened her resolve. Mia wasn't just fighting to bring Morales to justice. She was fighting for a system that too often failed people like her. She wanted to prove that justice could prevail, even in the face of systemic barriers. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Special Agent Marcus Williams, her handler and one of the few people she trusted implicitly. "Take the night to rest. We'll regroup in the morning. Morales won't slip through our fingers." Mia smiled faintly, grateful for his support. Williams had seen what she had endured tonight, and his unwavering confidence in her abilities was a reminder that she wasn't alone in this fight. The FBI wasn't perfect, but it was filled with people who, like her, believed in the power of change. As the apartment fell silent again, Mia thought about the broader implications of what had happened. Officer Turner's actions weren't unique. They were emblematic of a system that allowed bias to fester unchecked. His apology earlier had been a step in the right direction, but it was only a step. Real change required more than words. It required accountability, education, and a commitment to rooting out the prejudices that undermine the very foundations of justice. Mia reflected on the people who didn't have the privileges she had, the badge, the resources, the connections. How many others had been unjustly arrested, humiliated, or profiled without any recourse? How many lives had been disrupted because someone in power decided they didn't belong? The thought fueled her determination to continue her work, not just as an agent, but as a person committed to making the system better. She stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city. The light sparkled against the darkness, a reminder that life continued to move forward, no matter how heavy the burdens felt. Mia knew she couldn't change the world overnight, but she also knew that every small victory mattered. Every case she closed, every injustice she fought against, every step she took toward holding people accountable, it all added up. Tonight had been a setback, but it wasn't the end. It was a reminder of why she did what she did, of why she refused to back down even when the odds felt insurmountable. She was tired, but she wasn't defeated. Her mission to uphold justice, to dismantle the systems that enabled prejudice, and to protect those who couldn't protect themselves, was as vital as ever. Mia took a deep breath, letting the cool night air clear her mind. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new obstacles, and new opportunities to fight for what was right. And she would be ready. She had to be. As she turned away from the window and prepared to rest, Mia felt a flicker of hope amidst the exhaustion. The road ahead was long, but she wasn't walking it alone. The fight for justice was far from over, and she was more committed than ever to seeing it through. Resilience wasn't just about surviving, it was about pushing forward, no matter how many times you were knocked down. And Mia Johnson was ready to rise again. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Click on the video now to watch. We appreciate your support and we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments.